Now I'm glad to introduce our third speaker, Nusreen Al-Saim. She's a youth activist herself from Sudan. She's also a member of Mr. Antonio Guterres group youth panel on advisory group on climate change. Nusreen, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As Ahmed mentioned, I'm Nusreen Al-Saim. I'm from Sudan. I started climate activism in 2012. So I spent 10 years in the sector right now. And I can tell you that climate change impacts everything. My colleague Mariam and the previous presenter gave a great examples on how climate change can impact things that we never thought it's actually interlinked together and related. I had a presentation today, but for some reason I cannot share my screen and show it, but I will send it by email to the...
That would be my bad. I can make you a co-host right now.
Okay, let me try. Let's try.
You can try now.
Okay. No, I guess there's a problem from my side too. Anyway, I will talk about the presentation just to keep time, and I will send it later on to the organizers so they can share it with you online and emails. Actually, the advocacy for bringing the linkage between human rights and climate change started long ago. I can say even more than 15 years ago. But there was a huge resistance from the human rights gatekeepers. I like to call them gatekeepers because unfortunately now we are in a situation where some people, some entities say that this is a human right and this is not a human right. Although it's not the typical situation, it's not the perfect way to do things, especially if I think that something is in my right. You don't have to go to a committee to say, well, this is actually a human right or not. One of the big victories for the climate change movement was the announcement that happened last July in 2021. Where the Human Rights Council actually announced and adopted 2 resolutions on human rights and climate change. These resolutions were talking about how important it is to have a clean environment and sustainable future, not only for us, but for our next future generations. And it considered the violation of climate change adaptation and mitigation as violations of human rights. And it's very true. I can link it into many ways. For example, one of the human rights is the right to work, okay, and economic development. And if I am talking about that climate change will actually impact most of the sectors that people are working on right now, it will be a huge problem because first of all, most of the agricultural pastoralism sectors, which is the sectors that our countries, especially in Africa and in developing continent, depends on, will be highly impacted by climate change, which means that a lot of people will lose their livelihood. Secondly, climate change is a direct impact in the food security and also in the water security, which means that people will have droughts, famines, and a lot of other issues that will impact the right to live in the first place. Because of course, if I cannot find the drinkable water, and if I cannot find food to eat, then of course I will not be alive. A lot of things are also interlinked by the psychological impact of climate change. Imagine living your life knowing that your life will end very soon in a very tragic way because of climate crises. We heard a few months ago what happened in Samoa. Samoa is a small island. They had a huge volcano, and one of the islands of the country actually vanished, which means that we will also very soon have many, now we already have them, but the number will double and actually triple in a very short time of climate refugees. And climate refugees are not like political refugees or economic refugees, because political refugees, things can change in their countries and they can go back to it. But for example, if your country is underwater or became an uninhabitable island because of a volcano, for example, or hurricane, then how can you go back to your country in one day? This is so disruptive, and it means a lot of things. The Human Rights Council had an annual document, an annual magazine, let me say, put it like this, on how much climate change is impacting human rights in different fields, in different sectors, not only in Africa, but also in other continents. I really recommend you all to go through these journals, because it's very important. It covers many different. I have link to all of them also in the presentation that I will share with you later on. One of the most important things that we need to also highlight when talk about human rights and climate change in Africa, my colleagues already covered the right to live and also the safety and peace and security issues. Well, one of the efforts of the African Union regarding this is they had a committee, they called it Human Rights and Climate Change Committee within the AU. Also, they had another committee which called the GHOSC, or the GHOSC, which is a member of states or governments in Africa, working and leading also in the not only big issues related to climate change and environment, but also how climate change is very much linked to human rights. Also, we have the AMSEN, which is the African Ministerial Meeting on Environment. And the AMSEN is also one of the bodies that critically raises the issues of human rights and climate change. It's very important also to highlight that the linkages and the very, very obvious connection between human rights and climate change are a very strong tool in the climate negotiation. If you ever attended one of the conference of parties, or as they call it, COPs, you will hear human rights a lot. And unfortunately, one of the bad things that happened in the last COP in Glasgow, COP26 in UK, that a lot of texts about human rights were removed from the negotiation text because of the push of the developed countries. Although only a few months ago from the COP, it was endorsed 2 recommendations and 2 resolutions by the Human Rights Council on climate change. So they understand how dangerous it is to link climate change to human rights, because then it will be their historical responsibility violating the human rights of hundreds of thousands and millions of people in the planet who are living in Earth right now. Also, there is a lot of efforts in the Japan-African Climate Justice Alliance. They produced some documents in cooperation with Friedrich Ebert, Kenya, Nairobi, on climate change, peace and security, climate change and human rights, and they are all talking about the African continent. All of the sub-Saharan Africa human rights are very much linked to climate change. The right to development is very much linked to climate change, because if we have not a stable situation, if we have a conflict, if we don't have an infrastructure, or if we had an infrastructure that got destroyed by a flood, or if we had a drought, then even if we have an infrastructure, it will not be sufficient, because people will die if they don't have drinkable water. All of the development issues are very much linked to climate change in our continent, because we are not an industrial continent. And so all of what impacts the natural life that we actually depends on will impact everything else. And this is the very much clear recommendation that we are trying right now to put not only to the Conference of Parties of COP26, but all of the UN agencies to keep an eye on the linkage between human rights and climate change. I will also stop here and see if anyone have a question. And maybe when I share the presentation with you, you will have more information than I already shared with you.
Thank you so much, Nusreen. I mean, it was very informative. How you pointed out to new developments in both nature and international law, and also pointing out to other actors and institutions, whether in civil society or in international organizations, currently working on linking human rights to climate change. I mean, we are now open for questions, but I will use my privilege as a moderator to ask the first question, as I usually do. The three of you are women, are youthful women. I have had a question in mind. What is the link between gender and climate change? Should we do both at the same time, or should we prioritize doing gender and doing climate change? What's your thought on that, the three of you? Anyone can start.
As I already have my mic open also, I will go. Yes, so climate change is very much sex insensitive and gender insensitive. And I mean by that, we had a very, I'm trying to tell you a life story that I lived personally. We had a very bad flood in 2020. And I can tell you how much damage women and children were, because they had to move from their houses to live in a tent, which is not stable and not convenient, of course. There was a huge problem to access latrines because we don't have a lot of public latrines. Going to the bathroom, for example, and having access to washing water while having their period was a huge problem. Access to female pads and tampons and other things like this was a huge disaster also, because a lot of them drowned under the water. And what shocked me the most actually was how much damage women who were about to have their babies, because they could not actually reach the hospital. We could not send midwives to them, and even the places where we could send midwives to, they couldn't find a clean or a dry place to have the baby in. I still remember what I saw when I see a lady in a bed screaming, and there was 5 men trying to carry the bed over the water was here, the flood was here for them, and they were putting the bed on top of their heads just to cross the flood and try to get her to the driest place so she can have her baby. And not only that, but the physical and biological needs of the females are totally different than the man, and it's extremely hard to do it in a very hard and unstable situations like this. What I noticed the most also is that women and children were not only victimized in these situations, they were also agents of helping. They made a central kitchen where everyone used to cook in the central kitchen and then share the food with the others in the other tents. They also started doing small schools and class for the kids, and whenever a mother knows something that she teaches the other kids. They were quite active on how to survive and adapt to the situation, but sometimes some situations are a bit unadaptable. So my recommendation, answering to your question is, yes, women and children are the most vulnerable in climate change, but also they are very active change agents and building the resilience in the communities. So investing in these agents also will first of all reduce their vulnerability, and secondly will impact more their community, because they are definitely the closer to the community. Thank you.
Wow, I mean, thank you for pointing out to this, and I think this is a very important takeaway. How women are not only affected mostly, but they also contribute to the resilience against climate change mostly. I mean, we should definitely act on that.